Hi, this is Stephanie from Eat.Write.Teach, and today I want to share with you how I plan activities for my students. When I was doing my student teaching, my university required that we have very thorough plans laid out for every single day. I confess that going into my 7th year of teaching, I no longer do this. My school district requires that we post our daily lesson plans, but typically a plan that includes an objective, a daily agenda, and any assignments or tests will suffice. I know these requirements vary from district to district. Typically, when I do my weekly planning, I put the very basics of my lesson plans in my Sanity Saver, and then a more detailed version goes up on my classroom website for all to see. Sometimes, though, I do have to be more thorough in my planning. That's where my activity planner comes in handy. This is a free item you can pick up from my blog or from my Teachers Pay Teachers store. Today I'm going to show you how to access and use this activity planner to develop a thorough set of plans for those complex lessons. The supply list is pretty simple today. You will need an idea of what you want to do with your activity, and you'll need an activity planner form. Again, that's free from the Eat.Write.Teach website. You could also just use a piece of notebook paper, and that would be fine too. So step 1 is to download the activity planner form, which is very simple, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, moving on. Step 2 is to plan the basics of the activity. Now that you have your form, we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this activity? So now you're going to identify the objective of the activity and the standards that the activity is meeting. Let's go back to looking at the form. One important thing I should mention is if you plan to use the fill and print version of the activity planner, you're going to need Adobe Reader to do that. If you're a Google Chrome user, you'll notice that you can open PDFs in Google Chrome, but right now they don't have the capability to fill in these little boxes. See how when I put my mouse or cursor over the box, it lights up? So I can click in these boxes and I can type. You won't be able to do that in Google Chrome. So again, if you want to be able to type in here, you're going to have to open this in Adobe Reader. Okay, so I'm going to plan out the basics of my activity. So I've got a box for my title. So let's say, for example, that I was going to plan my first day of school stations activity that I blogged about recently. I would just type in the box, or click in the box, and I would type that in. I would put in the date of my activity, so in this case it would be the first day of school. And then my classes, for me, this would be all of my classes are going to do this, but you can write in the course name, you can put in the period numbers, whatever works for you. Then in here you have your objective. So what is it that you are wanting your students to gain from doing this? My activity that I'm planning today is a little different from what you would normally plan because it is a first day of school activity, so I'm not actually working towards standards. And I do have an objective, but it's not like a skills-based objective. My objective for having my students do this stations activity is I want my students to see how my class runs. It's a great way to teach students procedures early on without just reading from the syllabus to them. So anyway, that would be my objective. So I would type that in here. My objective is for my students to gain an understanding of how the class is going to operate. Standards. You have a spot here to type in your standards, whatever those might be. You don't have to type in your standards. You do whatever works best for you. But if you're going to turn this into administrators, they would probably love it if you put in your standards. Now that we have the basics figured out, let's move on to step 3. Planning the details. What will be necessary to make this activity successful? This is where the planning really is most essential. You want to write out in detail all material and prep work that will need to be done in advance of this activity. Anyone who's ever done this before can testify it is no fun to go into the middle of a really great activity you have planned only to realize that you forgot photocopies, or there was some other essential little item that you needed to have to make this work the way it was supposed to, and now you have a classroom full of students in the middle of an activity and you can't move on to the next step. So be very, very thorough in planning out the details. So the first thing you want to think about is what is it your students are going to need to bring to class that day. Your activity planner form automatically has textbook, pencils and pens, and notebook. Those are 3 things I kind of took for granted that you would probably have in your classroom and be used regularly. And maybe you don't, and that's fine too. But those 3 things are just automatically in there. The rest of these are those little text boxes, so you can click and you can type items in there. So like maybe your class will frequently use a binder. You can put that in there. Maybe you guys have a smash book. Maybe that's something they need to bring. Maybe they're going to need to bring their laptop. You're a one-to-one school, whatever it is. What you could do before you even start doing all of this is you could go through and list all of your frequently used items here and then save this planner, and then it's customized to you and what you know you're going to have to need, and you don't have to retype these every single time that you make a plan. It's however you want to do it. There are little spots for check marks, so you can either print this and then just check those items off. So let's say that your kids are going to need their textbook, and they're going to need a notebook, and they're going to need a binder. You can go through and check those things after you print this, or if you want to, there's an option to add in check marks here. So you can click add a check mark, and you can put in a check mark wherever you need to put those things. Okay, so that's the section for things your students are going to need to bring. The probably most important section of this whole thing is things you're going to need to prepare. The whole point of this planning thing is to make sure you are ready for the day that you have this activity. So this is broken into 4 sections: handouts, assessment tools, technology, and special supplies. And again, these are just spaces for you to type in anything, and I mean anything, that you are going to need for the activity. I would list every single handout. Make sure you write down the number of copies you need. The more detailed you make this plan now, the easier your life is going to be whenever you get to step 5, which is actually executing this thing. So those are the 4 sections for that. And then down at the bottom of the first page is an other information section. This is for any additional notes you have on the activity. Maybe you need to jot down some reminders to yourself, any of those kinds of things. Maybe you need to remember to move the desks to a certain position, or maybe you need to remember to label your chart paper before you hang it up on the wall, or whatever it is. That's the other information section. Okay, so now that we know what we are going to need to make this activity successful, we go to step 4, which is coming up with a procedure. All of my college lesson plans had to include a procedure, and while it was mind-numbing and exhausting to do at the time, I realized that it was actually extremely valuable, especially whenever you're coming up with something that is brand new. So if you are planning an activity you've never done before, I cannot more highly recommend coming up with a procedure. That way you have a game plan, so this whole thing should work out for you. So with our procedure, we need to think about how should this activity start, how should it run, and how is it going to finish up. So you're going to develop a procedure for how you will begin the activity, how you're going to keep it running smoothly, and how you will conclude the activity, which hopefully will not be the bell ringing. The second page of the activity planner is where you're going to write out your procedure. So this is your step-by-step how you're going to implement the activity. So my recommendation would be for you to plan what's going to happen before the final bell rings, as well as how the activity itself is going to happen, because what you have your students doing as they're walking through the door sets the tone for your entire class that period. So I would actually plan pre-bell what are you going to have students do? So maybe students will come in, find directions on the smart board, and follow those directions. It could be something as simple as that. Or maybe students will pick up material from your designated pickup area. Whatever it is you want your students doing before the actual bell rings, but it's still going to help set the tone for your class. Then you're actually going to come to your procedure, and I would just list it out. Step 1, this is going to happen. Step 2 is this. Step 3 is this. 4, so on and so forth. Again, the more detailed you can be, the better. And this way, you have this to help kind of keep you on track and to help keep your students on track. Your procedure should tell you not only what the students should be doing throughout the entire class period, but what you, the teacher, should be doing as well, because you probably are not going to just be hanging out at your desk watching chaos happen. You're probably going to be in and about and working with the students, that kind of thing. So give yourself a procedure. Make sure you know what you're planning on doing as well. And then the last thing to put in here is your conclusion. Basically, how are you going to conclude this activity? How are you going to conclude the class? I love to do group chats at the end of each class. So get everyone back together in a large group and talk about what was good, what was bad, what did they learn, what did they not learn, those kinds of things. That feedback is priceless to me. You can also do exit slips. Those are always great. Concluding activities. You could have some kind of a little quiz or some other kind of an assessment at the end. Probably your assessment is going to tie into your conclusion in some way, though that might not always be the case. But basically, if you look at this, this is bell-to-bell planning. So what's going to happen before that first bell rings, what's going to happen during the entire class period or block, and what's going to happen right before the bell rings and you dismiss those guys for the day. So that's your procedure. The final section I want to point out to you is at the bottom of this page there's a feedback section. This is where you can write, after the activity is over, where you can write down your reflections on the activity, and you can save that for next year. So this will be really useful if you're doing something you've never done before. You can write in here, oh, this worked, oh, this did not work. And that way next year you can go back, find this activity planner, make the necessary adjustments, and you're good to go. The last step in this whole thing is to print and execute. So now that you've created your plan, you can go click print, or if you already printed it and you hand wrote it out, you're done. And now you have to start executing this. A couple of tips I have to offer. The first one is to plan your activity well in advance of the date you actually plan to do it. I would not recommend planning a big giant activity like this the night before you're going to do it. You want to make sure you give yourself plenty of time. That moves on to my second tip. Allow yourself lots of time to gather all the materials and copies you will need. For example, my first day stations activity is going to require a lot of photocopies, and I know that if I photocopy the day before I plan to do this activity, that will be the day that the photocopier decides to go on the fritz, and it's not going to work, and I will have a disaster on my hands because what am I going to do the first day of school now? So, plan in advance. I recommend running this activity through your head several times, just from beginning to end, to see if you can pick out any flaws in your plan. So run through it, play devil's advocate, figure out what's not going to work out so well, and then make the necessary adjustments. My fourth tip, and this goes with all things teaching, is to be prepared and be flexible, because the best laid plans can go awry in half a second. Somebody comes on the announcements and they announce that they need half of your class to go down to the office. Well, that's not going to work. Or you actually don't have enough photocopies you thought you did, but you don't. That's always a problem. Or you needed a certain number of students in each of the little groups you'd planned, and a third of your class, for whatever reason, is absent that day. So just make sure that you kind of have an idea of what you're going to do in case things are to not go the way that you had hoped that they would. Hopefully, though, by going through this planner and making sure you take your time, you gather up all of your materials, and you run through this several times, you should have a really great activity, and hopefully everything will go well for you. day.